I should have kept walking. That's the part that still haunts me. The rain came down in thin, steady sheets, tapping against my hood, soaking through the edges of my scrubs like it always did after a double shift that ran too long and paid too little, and all I wanted was my car, my couch, and maybe 4 hours of sleep before doing it all over again. But Blue had other plans. He stopped mid-step, leash going tight in my hand, his body rigid, ears forward, a low sound building in his chest that I'd never heard before, not fear, not aggression, something sharper, more certain, like he'd found something that mattered. Blue, come on, I whispered, my voice hoarse, glancing down the empty street that stretched for half a block without a single car or person, the kind of silence that makes your instincts wake up whether you want them to or not. But he didn't move. He pulled, hard enough that I stumbled forward a step, then another, until we were turning into a narrow alley I had walked past 100 times without ever noticing. And that's when I saw him. A man in a wheelchair, sitting at an angle like he'd been left there instead of choosing to stop, his white shirt darkened in places from the rain, one hand resting loosely on the wheel, the other curled around a small silver object that caught the light every time lightning flickered somewhere far off. I froze. Every rule I'd ever learned about staying safe clicking into place at once. Don't get involved. Don't approach strangers at night. Call someone. Keep moving. But Blue let out a sharp bark and pulled again, softer this time, almost like he was asking instead of demanding, and the man lifted his head just enough for me to see his face, pale, composed, eyes steady in a way that didn't match the situation at all. He didn't look panicked, didn't look relieved to see me, didn't even look surprised. He just looked at me like he was measuring something I didn't understand. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice low, controlled, not weak, not broken, just certain, and that should have been my second warning. The first being that everything about him felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, but instead I stepped closer, because that's what I do. That's what nurses do. We ignore the voice that tells us to walk away, and we choose the one that says help. Even when it doesn't make sense, even when it costs us. You're hurt, I said, crouching just enough to see him better, keeping a safe distance but close enough to notice the way his breathing was just a little too careful, the way his grip tightened almost imperceptibly around that silver object, a lighter maybe, or something else entirely. Blue moved first, sitting beside the chair. Like he belonged there, tail low but steady, watching the man's face instead of mine, and the strangest thing was the man didn't push him away, didn't flinch, just let him stay, like he was used to things approaching him without permission, like control wasn't something he ever had to ask for. I can call an ambulance, I offered, already reaching for my phone, already slipping into the routine that made everything simpler, measurable, fixable, but his gaze sharpened just slightly, enough that I stopped before I even realized I had. No, he said, and this time there was something underneath it, not fear, not anger, something closer to command, and for a second, just 1 second, I felt it, that shift in the air, like the night itself was paying attention to him, not me, not the rain, him, and I should have left then. I should have taken Blue and gone back to the street and pretended I never saw anything, but instead I stayed, because he was in a wheelchair, because he was alone, because whatever else he was, he looked like someone who hadn't been helped in a very long time, and that was the mistake that changed everything. If I let you help me, you do exactly what I say. It was not a request, and that should have been enough to make me walk away, but I nodded anyway, because something in his voice made arguing feel pointless, like he was used to being listened to even when he had no right to be, and I hated that I noticed it. Fine, I said, keeping my tone steady, but if you pass out, I call for help whether you like it or not. His lips almost moved, not quite a smile, not quite approval, just acknowledgement, and that was all I got. I stepped closer. Then, careful, controlled, the way I had been trained, scanning quickly, checking for what I could without making him feel cornered. His shirt was damp and cold from the rain, his breathing shallow but even, his posture too straight for someone who was supposed to be barely holding on. And that was when I realized something that made my stomach tighten. He was not slumped because he was weak. He was still holding himself upright on purpose. Like letting go was not an option he allowed himself. What happened? I asked, already knowing I would not get a real answer. Wrong place, he said, eyes flicking past me toward the mouth of the alley for half a second before returning. Wrong timing. It sounded simple, But it did not feel simple. Not with the way his fingers tightened slightly on the wheel. Not with the way Blue shifted closer to him instead of away, resting his head lightly against the man's knee as if he had decided something I had not. "We need to get you out of the rain," I said, glancing around again. The street's still empty, the air still too quiet. My apartment is half a block away. I should not have said that. I knew it the second the words left my mouth, but it was too late to take them back, and he studied me for a moment that stretched just long enough to make me question everything. "You trust people too easily," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. "No," I replied softly, adjusting my grip on the handles of the chair. "I just do not leave people behind." And that, more than anything, seemed to settle something in him, because he gave a small nod, once precise, like a decision had been made. "Then move," he said. And just like that, I was pushing him out of the alley, the wheels rolling smoothly over wet pavement, the sound louder than it should have been in the quiet night. Every turn of the wheel making me more aware of how exposed we were, how strange this all was, how none of it fit into anything normal. "Left," he instructed suddenly as we reached the sidewalk, his voice low but sharp. "Not the main street." I hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then followed, because again, arguing felt useless. We moved through the side path instead, the long way around, the darker way, and I told myself it was because he was hurt, because maybe he was scared, because maybe he just wanted privacy. But deep down I knew it was something else entirely, something about being seen or not being seen, and that thought stayed with me all the way to my building, an old brick walk-up with flickering lights and a door that stuck in the rain. I pushed it open with my shoulder, guiding the chair inside, the warmth hitting us immediately, carrying the faint smell of old carpet and someone's late-night cooking. And for the first time since I found him, he exhaled, just slightly, like he had been holding something in until now. "Third floor," I said, already bracing myself for the stairs, and that was when I realized the problem. I looked at the chair, then at him, then back at the narrow stairwell that barely fit two people side by side. "We will figure it out," I added quickly, more to myself than to him, but he was already watching me again. That same unreadable expression, that same quiet intensity, and in that moment, standing there with rain still dripping from my sleeves and my dog pressed against his side like they had known each other for years, I had the strangest, most unsettling thought. This was not me saving him. Not really. This was me stepping into something I did not understand. Something that had already started long before I ever walked into that alley. And the worst part was, it did not feel like an accident anymore. Getting him up the stairs was not the hard part. Not really. It was everything around it. The silence in the hallway. The way the old light above us flickered like it was deciding whether to stay on or leave us in the dark. The sound of my own breathing getting louder with every step as I tried to figure out how to move a full-grown man in a wheelchair up 3 narrow flights without making a scene. "There is a service entrance in the back," he said quietly, already noticing the problem before I could say it out loud. "There is a ramp." I blinked at him, surprised, because I had lived in this building for almost 2 years and never knew that existed. "How do you know that?" I asked, and that was when he looked at me in a way that made my skin prickle, not threatening, not warm, just aware, like he had already seen more of my life than I was comfortable with. "I pay attention," he said simply, and then he gestured toward the back hallway like he was used to giving directions and being followed, and again, I followed, because it felt easier than questioning him. The ramp was there, hidden behind a heavy metal door that groaned when I pushed it open, slick from the rain but manageable. And within minutes we were inside my apartment, small, cluttered in a lived-in way, a worn couch, a narrow kitchen, a stack of unpaid bills tucked neatly under a coffee mug. I suddenly saw it through his eyes and felt exposed in a way I could not explain. "It is not much," I said, setting the brakes on the wheelchair, and he shook his head once. "It is enough," he replied, and something about the way he said it made it sound like a judgment and a compliment at the same time. Blue moved immediately, circling once before settling at his feet again, tail brushing lightly against the floor like a steady rhythm. "You have a first aid kit?" he asked, already scanning the room, noting exits, windows, angles. I could see it now, the way his eyes never stopped moving, the way nothing escaped him. "Yeah," I said, moving quickly, grabbing the kit from under the sink, my hands falling back into routine, clean, assess, stabilize, simple steps that grounded me when everything else fell off. I knelt in front of him, careful, controlled, aware of the distance but close enough to do what needed to be done. This might hurt a little, I warned, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something in his expression, not fear, not hesitation, something closer to patience, like discomfort was not something he reacted to anymore, just something he endured. Do what you need to do, he said, and I did, working methodically, focusing on the task, the sound of rain tapping softly against the window behind me, the warmth of the apartment replacing the cold from outside, the steady presence of Blue beside us. It should have felt normal, like any other time I helped someone, but it did not, because even sitting there, even letting me help, he still felt in control, like the room belonged to him now, not me, like I had invited something in that I could not take back. You are not asking questions, he said after a while, his voice cutting through the quiet, and I paused, just for a second, before continuing. I am a nurse, I replied, keeping my tone even. I fix what I can first, then I worry about the rest. He watched me for a moment longer, then nodded slightly, like I had passed some kind of test I did not know I was taking. And that should have been a relief, but it was not, because I realized something then, something that settled deep in my chest and refused to move. This man did not just accept help, he evaluated it, measured it, decided what to do with it. And for some reason I could not explain, I had the feeling that whatever decision he made about me next was going to matter more than anything I had planned for the rest of my life. The moment I finished, he did not thank me, and somehow that felt more honest than if he had. He simply adjusted slightly in the chair, testing his balance with a subtle shift that most people would not have noticed, but I did, because I was still watching him the way you watch something you do not fully understand. You should rest, I said, standing up slowly, wiping my hands on a clean towel, trying to ignore the way the room felt smaller now, like his presence had changed the air itself. He did not respond right away. His eyes moved instead, scanning the apartment again, the window, the door, the narrow hallway, mapping everything in a way that made me uneasy without knowing exactly why. Lock your door, he said finally, and it was not a suggestion, it was quiet, firm, and immediate. I hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. Why? I asked, crossing my arms slightly, more out of instinct than defiance. And that was when his gaze settled on me fully for the first time since I had started helping him, steady, direct, impossible to ignore, because someone might come looking, he said, and the simplicity of it made my chest tighten. For you? I asked, my voice lower now, more careful, and he did not answer right away, which was answer enough. I moved to the door anyway, turning the lock with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have in the quiet apartment. When I turned back, he was watching me again, but this time there was something else there, something that felt almost like approval, and that bothered me more than anything else so far. You said no ambulance. I continued, stepping closer but keeping distance. You avoided the main street. You knew about the back entrance to my building, and now you are telling me someone might come looking for you. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my voice steady. That is not normal. He tilted his head slightly, considering my words like they were part of a larger calculation. No, he agreed quietly. It is not. The honesty of it caught me off guard, and for a second, I did not know what to say next. Blue shifted at his feet, letting out a soft sigh, completely at ease in a situation that felt anything but normal to me. You should not have brought me here, he added after a moment, his tone unchanged, and that made something in me push back. I know, I said, meeting his gaze this time. But I did. The silence that followed was different, heavier, like something had settled between us that neither of us could ignore anymore. Then we adjust, he said, and there it was again. That quiet authority, that assumption that situations could be managed if you were willing to do what was necessary. I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the rain still clinging to my clothes. I repeated, and his expression shifted just enough to make my breath catch, not softer, not warmer, just certain. You saw me, he said simply. That makes this your situation too. My heart skipped, not out of fear exactly, but something close, something sharper, because deep down, I knew he was right. I had crossed a line the moment I stepped into that alley, and there was no walking back from it now. You do not even know my name, I said, trying to regain some ground, some sense of control. And for the first time, something almost resembling amusement touched his expression, faint, brief, gone before I could be sure it was real. Claire, he said, and the way he said it made the room feel even smaller, like the walls had shifted just an inch closer. I stared at him, my pulse quickening. I never told you that, I whispered, and he held my gaze without hesitation, without apology. No, he replied. You did not. And that was the moment everything changed, not when I found him, not when I brought him home, but right then, standing in my own apartment, realizing that the man in the wheelchair knew things about me I had never chosen to share, and worse, I had the feeling he knew exactly what he was going to do with that. My name did not sound like mine anymore when he said it. It sounded like something he had already decided belonged to him, not in a way that was loud or obvious, but in the quiet way he seemed to take control of everything without asking, and I felt it settle somewhere deep in my chest before I could push it away. How do you know that? I asked, my voice tighter now, sharper, because this was no longer about helping a stranger. This was about me, about my space, my life, my name, and he did not look away, did not soften, did not even pretend this was normal. I told you, he said, calm, measured. I pay attention. And that answer should not have been enough, but somehow it was, because it came with that same certainty that made arguing feel like a waste of time. That is not just paying attention. I pushed, stepping back, slightly, putting a little more distance between us, between me and whatever this was becoming. That is something else. His gaze followed me, not aggressively, just aware, tracking every movement like it mattered, like I mattered in a way I did not understand yet. Yes, he said after a moment, and the single word landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. No denial, no excuse, just confirmation. And that was worse, because now I knew he was not trying to hide it, which meant he did not feel like he needed to. Blue shifted again, pressing closer to him instead of me, and that small betrayal made something twist in my chest. You are making this sound like I am in danger, I said, quieter now, more careful, because the room felt different again, like the ground under me had shifted just enough to throw off my balance. You are, he replied, just as quietly, and I froze, because there was no hesitation in it, no exaggeration, just a simple statement delivered like fact. Because of you? I asked, and this time he did not answer right away. His eyes moved briefly toward the window, toward the street beyond it, and I followed his gaze without thinking. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle, the streetlights casting long reflections across the pavement, and then I saw it. A car parked across the street that I did not remember being there before, dark, still, engine off, but something about it made my stomach drop. Do not go to the window, he said softly, and the way he said it made me step back before I even realized I was moving. They might not be looking for me yet, he continued, his voice low, controlled, but they will be. My heart started to beat faster. Not panic, not yet, but something close, something building under the surface. And if they are not looking for you, I said slowly, trying to keep my thoughts steady, then why are you here? That question hung in the air between us, heavier than anything else, because it was the one thing I had not wanted to ask, the one thing I had been avoiding since the moment I saw him in that alley. And he held my gaze, completely still now, no scanning, no calculating, just direct, deliberate focus. Because you found me first, he said, and something in the way he said it made my breath catch, not relief, not comfort, something else entirely, something that felt like a door closing behind me. That means something, he added, quieter now, and I realized then that this was not random, not entirely. That whatever I had stepped into, whatever this was, it had rules I did not understand yet, and he did. And for the first time since this started, I felt it clearly, not fear of him exactly, but fear of what being connected to him might mean, because the man sitting in my living room was not just someone I had helped. He was someone who had already decided I was part of his world, and I was starting to understand that leaving it might not be an option anymore. The air in my apartment felt heavier after that, like every sound carried further than it should, like even the smallest movement might matter in ways I did not understand, and I found myself listening, really listening, to things I would have ignored before. The hum of the refrigerator, the the faint drip of rain from the window frame, the distant echo of a car passing somewhere down the block. "Sit," he said quietly, not looking at me this time, his attention shifting back toward the door, toward the hallway beyond it. And I realized he was not just talking to me. He was placing things, arranging them, like every person and object had a position they were supposed to hold. And without thinking, I sat, not because I wanted to, but because something in his tone made it feel like the right move. Blue followed immediately, settling at my feet now, as if adjusting to whatever invisible line had just been drawn. "We wait," he added, and that word settled into the room like a rule, not a suggestion. I swallowed, trying to steady my breathing, trying to make sense of the situation without letting the fear take over. "For what?" I asked, and this time he did look at me, not long, just enough to make sure I understood. "To see if they move," he said, and I did not need to ask who they were anymore. The car outside, the silence, the way he had reacted, it all connected in a way that made my chest tighten. Minutes passed, slow, stretched, each one longer than the last. I kept my eyes on the door, on the thin line of shadow beneath it, half expecting something to shift, to change, to break the stillness, but nothing did. And somehow that was worse, because it meant this was not chaos. This was control, and whoever was out there was just as patient as the man sitting across from me. "You are too tense," he said suddenly, and I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. "I have a stranger in my apartment who knows my name and thinks someone might be watching my building," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended. "I think I am allowed to be tense." And for a second, something in his expression shifted again, not amusement, not exactly, but close enough that it caught me off guard. "Fair," he said simply, and that small acknowledgement did something strange. It did not relax me, but it made the situation feel just a little more real, less like something I had stepped into alone. "They are not here for you," he continued after a moment, his tone more measured now, like he was choosing what to say carefully. "Not yet." The addition of those two words made my stomach drop. "That is not reassuring," I said, shaking my head slightly, and he leaned back just enough in the chair to shift his weight. A small movement, but controlled, deliberate. "It is not meant to be," he replied, and there it was again, that honesty that made everything feel sharper, clearer, harder to ignore. I looked at him then, really looked, at the way he held himself, at the way even sitting there he seemed like he was in control of more than just this room. And a thought formed slowly, quietly, one that I had been avoiding since the beginning. "Who are you?" I asked, not out of curiosity anymore, but because I needed to know what I had brought into my life. And he met my gaze without hesitation, without deflection. "Someone who does not get left in alleys," he said, and the answer was not an answer at all, but it told me everything I needed to know. And in that moment, sitting there in the dim light of my small apartment with my dog watching him like he already belonged there, I realized something that made my pulse quicken again. I had not just helped a man that night. I had interrupted something bigger than me, and now I was sitting in the middle of it, waiting to see what would happen next. The waiting did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like something unseen had made a decision without telling us. And I felt it before I saw it, a subtle change in the air, a difference in the silence that made my chest tighten just a little more. "They are leaving," he said quietly, his eyes already on the window, not moving toward it, not needing to, just knowing. And I turned instinctively, stopping myself before I got too close. Careful now in a way I had not been before. The car across the street that had been sitting still for what felt like forever was gone. The space empty like it had never been there at all, and somehow that felt worse than if it had stayed. "That is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They just leave?" He shook his head slightly, a small, controlled motion. "No," he said, "they adjust." The word echoed in my mind. The same word he had used earlier, like everything followed the same pattern, like this was a game I had stepped into without knowing the rules. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself, trying to bring things back to something normal, something I could understand. "So what happens now?" I asked, and for the first time since this started, he leaned back more fully in the chair, just enough to let some of the tension in his shoulders ease, but not disappear, never disappear. "Now they wait for me to move," he replied, and that simple statement made it clear this was not over, not even close. Blue shifted beside me, standing now, his ears perked toward the door, then toward the window, then back to Adrian, like he was tracking something I could not see. And you? I pressed, because I needed to hear it, needed to know where this left me. What are you going to do? His gaze returned to me, steady, direct, and there it was again, that feeling that I was part of whatever answer came next whether I liked it or not. I stay, he said, and my breath caught, not because I had not expected it, but because hearing it out loud made it real in a way I could not ignore here. I asked, even though I already knew the answer. For now, he confirmed, and the finality in his tone left no room for debate. I shook my head slightly, a quiet disbelief settling in. You do not even know me, I said, softer now, not arguing, just stating what felt obvious, and something in his expression shifted again, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough that I noticed. I know enough, he replied. And that should have unsettled me more than it did, but instead, it did. Something else, something quieter, something that made my thoughts slow down instead of speed up. You brought me in, he continued, his voice lower now, less sharp, but no less certain. You chose that. I opened my mouth to respond, to push back, to say it was not like that I had just helped someone, that it did not mean anything beyond that. But the words did not come, because deep down I knew he was right. I had made a choice, and choices had consequences, even ones that started with something as simple as stopping in an alley. This is temporary, I said instead, trying to hold on to something solid, something I could control, and he watched me for a moment before giving a small nod. Everything is, he said, and there was something in the way he said it that made the word feel heavier than it should have, like temporary did not mean safe, did not mean simple, just meant not permanent yet. Blue moved again, this time settling between us, looking from me to him like he was waiting for something, like he already understood what I was still trying to figure out, and I realized then, sitting there in the quiet after the storm with a man I did not know and yet somehow could not ignore, that the situation had shifted again, not just danger, not just uncertainty, something else had started to form, something quieter but just as powerful, a connection built on a moment that neither of us had planned. And the unsettling part was not that he was staying, it was that a small part of me had already accepted that he would. Sleep did not come the way it usually did. It hovered somewhere just out of reach, thin and restless, like my body refused to fully relax with him still in the room. And I told myself it was because of the situation, because of the uncertainty, because of everything he had said. But that was not the whole truth, because part of it was him, the way he existed in the space without trying to, the way even in stillness he felt like movement waiting to happen. I stayed on the couch, wrapped in a blanket I had pulled tight around my shoulders, while he remained in the chair near the window, not asleep, not fully awake, just present. And every time I shifted, every time Blue lifted his head or the building creaked, his eyes were already open, already aware, like rest was something he did not trust anymore. You should sleep, I said quietly at one point, my voice softer now, less defensive than before, and he did not look at me right away, his attention still on the reflection in the glass, on the world outside instead of the one inside. I will, he replied after a moment, but he did not move, and I knew he was not going to, not really, not until something told him it was safe, and that realization settled into me in a way I could not ignore. This was not just caution, this was habit, something learned over time, something that had shaped him into who he was now. You do not trust this place, I said, more statement than question, and this time he looked at me, just briefly. I trust variables, he answered, and I frowned slightly, not understanding, and I do not know enough about this one yet, he added, and that included me. I realized, not just the apartment, not just the building, me, and instead of pushing back, instead of feeling offended, I found myself nodding slightly, because that made sense in a way nothing else had. That is fair, I said quietly, and something shifted again, subtle but real, like we had reached a different level of understanding without meaning to. The hours passed slowly after that, the rain eventually stopping, leaving behind a stillness that felt heavier than the storm itself. And sometime just before sunrise, when the sky outside turned from black to a dull gray, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, Blue was moving, not barking, not panicking, just alert, his body tense in a way that made my eyes open immediately, and Adrian was already watching the door, his posture sharper now, more focused than it had been all night. "Someone is here," he said quietly, and the calm in his voice made my pulse spike faster than. If he had sounded afraid, there was a soft sound from the hallway, not loud, not obvious, just enough to be noticed if you were paying attention, and I realized then how much I had changed in just a few hours, because now I was paying attention too. "Do not answer it," he added, before I could even think about moving, and I froze, my breath catching as the sound came again. A light knock. Almost polite, almost normal, but nothing about this felt normal anymore. Blue let out a low, quiet sound in his chest, staying close to me, but watching the door like he was waiting for something. And I sat there, completely still, every instinct telling me to get up, to check, to do something. But his words held me in place. "They will try to confirm," he said softly, his eyes never leaving the door. "If you answer, you become part of it in a way you cannot undo." My hands tightened slightly around the edge of the blanket, my heart beating louder in my ears. And for the first time since this started, I did not question him. I did not argue. I just listened, because something in me finally understood that whatever world he came from, whatever had followed him here, it was already touching mine, and the knock came. Again, a little firmer this time, still controlled, still patient, like whoever was on the other side knew exactly how long they could wait. And in that moment, sitting in the dim light of early morning with my dog pressed against my side and a man I barely knew guiding every decision I made, I realized something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore. This was no longer about whether I had made a mistake stopping in that alley. It was about whether I could survive the consequences of it. The knock came a third time, steady, deliberate, like whoever stood on the other side of that door had already decided they were not leaving without an answer. And I felt it in my chest, that pull to move, to respond, to return the world to something normal, something simple. But nothing about this was simple anymore, and Adrian did not move, not even an inch, his eyes fixed on the door, his presence sharper now, like everything in him had shifted into place. "Stay where you are," he said, quietly, and I did, because at this point, listening to him felt less like a choice and more like survival. The silence stretched after that. Heavy, waiting, and then a voice came. Through the door, calm, neutral, almost polite. "Miss Bennett, building maintenance, we need to check a water issue reported from your unit." My breath caught, because they knew my name, not guessed, not asked, knew, and that alone told me this was not random. This was precise, planned. "Do not respond," Adrian said softly, and I nodded even though he was not looking at me, my hands tightening against the blanket as I tried to slow my breathing. "We can hear you inside, ma'am," the voice continued, still calm, still controlled. "It will just take a minute." Blue let out a low sound beside me, not loud, not aggressive, just enough to say something was wrong, and I trusted him more than I trusted the voice on the other side of that door. Seconds passed, then a minute, maybe more, and the silence that followed felt like a test. Like they were waiting to see if I would break first. "They are confirming patterns," Adrian said, almost to himself, his tone thoughtful now instead of tense, like he was reading something invisible in the situation. "They expected a reaction." I swallowed, my throat dry. "And when they do not get one?" I asked quietly, and he finally looked at me again, his expression calm in a way that should have reassured me, but did not completely. "Then they change approach," he said. And right on cue, the hallway shifted, footsteps, more than one this time, controlled, measured, not rushing, not loud, just present, and I felt my pulse spike again, faster now, sharper, but I stayed where I was, because moving felt like the wrong answer, the only wrong answer. "Listen to me," Adrian said, his voice lower now, more direct, and I focused on him completely, blocking out everything else. "No matter what you hear next, you do not open that door." I nodded again, the motion small but certain, because something in me had finally settled into place. Fear still there, uncertainty still there, but underneath it, something stronger, something steadier, trust, not in the situation, not in what was happening, but in him, in the way he understood it, in the way he moved through it without hesitation. The footsteps stopped right outside, closer now, too close, and the silence returned, heavier than before, like the building itself was holding its breath. And in that moment, sitting there with my dog pressed against my side and a man who had walked into my life like a storm I never saw coming, I realized something that changed everything. I was no longer waiting for this to end. I was waiting to see what he would do next, because somewhere between the alley and this door, between fear and understanding, between instinct and choice, the line had shifted, and I had crossed it without even realizing it. And whatever came after this, whatever happened when that door, was no longer just a barrier but a decision. I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was not facing it alone anymore.